If you were to think of the best tank in Russia's arsenal, it would likely be the T-14 Armata, and to an extent you would be correct. However, once you look at the production numbers nearly 10 years after its inception, it's easy to see why this tank's quality is made practically irrelevant by its minute quantity, which many may find quite ironic coming from the Russians, with their tank production doctrine usually being the other way around. So while the T-14 shows promise, and both sides are underplaying and overplaying its actual capabilities, it's clearly not the tank to actually be talking about right now. That accolade belongs to another tank, something that is a potent weapon capable of going toe to toe with the best of Western armour, with production numbers high enough to make it actually somewhat relevant: the T-90M. The T-90M is Russia's way of squeezing as much life as possible out of its dating Soviet platform, the T-72. And to an extent it can be considered a success, but as Russia's most modern tank actually seeing action, it does leave much to be desired in some areas. Many design cues are still present from the T-72, and as some have been captured in Ukraine, it's only a matter of time until the true capabilities of this tank are better known. But from what we do know, it's looking like a lethal tank that could at very least pose a threat to Western tanks in modern warfare. Now, one mistake many make when judging tanks is that they see things in a black and white scenario, when in reality armoured warfare is a messy business and mostly comes down to who can spot who first, especially in the modern era when nearly all tanks are capable of eliminating each other from most angles. So instead, we analyse the things that can give them that slight edge in a skirmish, and even then it doesn't mean things will go as we expect. So this is something to take into account as we move forward. The T-90M has issues which do indeed affect its chances in warfare against other main battle tanks, and we will discuss this shortly, but it also has enough strengths that make it a relevant contender on the modern battlefield. With a weight of 48 tons, Russia's latest variant is a lightweight when compared to many Western tanks, and this is certainly a valid advantage in transport and fuel consumption, as well as dealing with bridges and poor terrain. When it comes to speed, however, it is comparable to most Western tanks, with the Challenger 2, Leopard 2, Abrams all hovering around 60 km an hour, give or take a few. So there's not a crazy advantage there, and in fact mobility is one area where the T-90M is massively handicapped in a fatal way. The size of the tank is one area that can be seen, however, as both an advantage and disadvantage. The smaller size means its ergonomics for the crew is lesser than Western counterparts, but this is with the advantage of being a smaller, lower target, which has been the case with Soviet designed tanks for a long time. So what is the T-90M? Is it a brand new tank or just another rehashed T-72? To make sense of what the T-90M actually is, we need to briefly understand what tanks led up to it. The T-90M is the latest modernised variant of the T-90, which is a modernised variant of the T-72BM, which is a modernised variant of the T-72B, which is a modernised variant of the T-72A, and well, you get the idea. It's a heavily modernised T-72. Now, it would be fair to assume this name change was just for Russia to pretend that it had some new tanks that didn't bear the same reputation as the T-72 began to hold. But the truth is that the reason for the name change of the T-72 to T-90 is largely due to the USSR's collapse, as following the incarnation of the Russian Federation, the new government wanted the latest models that were being produced in what was practically a different country at that point to have a different designation. So T-72s were built in the USSR and T-90s were built in the Russian Federation. Unfortunately, this does lead to much confusion, and some to pretend that the T-90 is absolutely without any weaknesses present in the T-72, which is not the case at all. And if you're wondering where the iconic red eyes of the T-90A's Storer system went, that system was effective against the threats of its time. However, this is no longer the case as that time has passed, and therefore that aspect of the system was removed from the later T-90 models. The T-90M is an improvement on design, featuring many new attributes that make it a much better option than its predecessors. When it comes to armour, the T-90M's relic era is a worthy upgrade over previous Contact 5, offering around 20% greater protection against long rod penetrators, and nearly 30% more protection against heat rounds. By all means, the T-90M is not an invulnerable fortress, just like all tanks, as has been shown with a number being destroyed in Ukraine, but it is certainly much better armour than the original T-72 it stems from, and could well survive a number of shots from modern MBTs in tank-on-tank combat. When it comes to lethality, it is armed with the latest version of the common 2A46 smoothbore gun, specifically the 2A46M5. Like the T-72B3 that shares the same gun, it is limited by the actual shell this gun can fire. The Svinet series of APFS DS rounds, which are considerably smaller than Western counterparts due to being 2-piece ammunition, are the main option. This very issue is one of the reasons that Britain is changing out the rifled 120mm gun on the Challenger 2 in its upgrade to the Challenger 3, as longer APFS DS rounds are much more effective than shorter 2-piece variants, though the need for NATO standardisation is also a heavy factor in this specific change. Nonetheless, against the armour being faced in Ukraine, the T-90M has showed it is a lethal weapon on the battlefield, and while many may not like to hear this, will also be capable of eliminating many of the Western tanks Ukraine has been provided with, from a number of angles. However, the same situation is true vice versa, because, and now this is a little tangent, but bear with me, despite how many nationalists from various countries laughing as tank nerds like to claim their tank is invincible, and the second any tank model from a country they dislike is destroyed in combat that it must be rendered completely useless, it's hard to explain to those types that while of course a T-90M may have been destroyed, that doesn't mean we don't still treat it as a valid threat. Albeit this is the same case the Leopard 2 is currently experiencing after some were seen destroyed as part of Ukraine's ongoing counter-offensive, which has suddenly followed with many brushing the Leopard off as a bad tank. Of course, much of this is down to a lack of understanding, so it's just worth noting that tanks have never been invincible. And when you send tanks to war, they will be destroyed, be it by artillery, air power, mines, or other tanks. Using an instance of a tank being some sort of trump card is simply unfair, and thus we should avoid making the same mistake with Russian tanks too. So with that in mind, the armour of the T-90M is improved, capable, but not invincible, much like its competition. I could spend an extended amount of time comparing claimed penetration values and so forth, but not only is much of this information largely speculative due to the tank's classified nature, but it also doesn't paint a realistic picture for what actually goes down on the battlefield. The frontal turret is likely to be hard to penetrate for older Soviet ammunition that Ukraine is using in its Soviet tanks, but when it comes to Western tanks provided, it just isn't clear. Russia has made claims about the capabilities of the armour, but taking that at face value given their track record just seems unwise. Side on and from the rear, the tank is vulnerable, pretty much like any other. So with armour, there's honestly just not much to go on outside of speculation. Where the T-90M has legitimately been improved that is important is in optics and fire control systems. The tank commander now has use of a panoramic and thermal vision sight to track targets much more effectively, something that has been standard on most NATO systems for some time. As well as this, a much more modern gunner optics. What this means is that unlike the T-72s of the Gulf War, the latest T-90 variant will actually have a fighting chance due to it being much better in situational awareness, something that is often more of a deciding factor than armour in modern tank-on-tank engagements. It's also worth noting that its optics place it much ahead of what Ukraine was using in the early stages of the war, when the best tank it had to field was modernised T-64s and T-80s. Of course, this has massively changed with Ukraine capturing swaths of Russian armour, including T-90Ms, as well as foreign aid in the form of Western tanks. So this advantage will continue to be diminished as time goes on, but is definitely an area where the T-90M is pretty good. Another important upgrade for the T-90M is the fitting of blowout panels and a rear bustle for the storing of ammunition, much improving crew survivability and reducing the risk of turrets popping off when the tank is penetrated. However, it's important to note that the infamous carousal for ammunition is still present, as the autoloader is not a bustle autoloader. The blowout panels only remove the shells that were stored outside of the carousal from harming the crew. The carousel's design initially was to keep shells as low as possible to be a hard target to hit, which does make sense especially when we realise most T-72 cook-offs were allegedly caused by the ammunition stored outside of this carousel and not with the carousel itself. However, only time will tell if this is truly the case. So the T-90M has come a long way since the T-72, fixing a good number of issues the T-72 began to face as it aged. However, it is not without its flaws. See, the T-72 had two notorious flaws that had persisted all the way to the T-90M. Firstly, the T-72's awful gun depression. For those that don't know, gun depression is vital in allowing a tank to engage targets while showing as little of itself as possible, which is one of the reasons many Western tanks are known for having a weak lower glacis. Not only does it help in hiding the tank and thus make it a smaller target, but it also allows for more movement of a stabilised gun to stay on target when moving over rough ground. The less your gun can depress, the smoother the ground needs to be to keep the gun on target in movement. In this regard, the T-90M still shares this issue, one that could be a deciding factor in many engagements against Western tanks, putting the T-90M at a disadvantage. As well as this is the T-72's woefully slow reverse speed. Now, any tank expert knows how important this is. Many often state that the reverse speed of a tank is much more important than its forward driving speed, which I personally agree with as long as its decent forward mobility is still present. When a tank engages a target, the main gun immediately gives away the position of the tank, and there is a period of time following this where reloading must be done. Due to this, fire manoeuvre often takes place, where a tank avoids firing from the same position or fires and moves out of sight to reload. This is also the case if a hostile threat has engaged the host vehicle. Reversing is the only way to manoeuvre out of danger without exposing the rear, weaker armour of the tank, as T-90Ms have been seen doing in Ukraine due to the slow reverse speed. This is because the T-90M's reverse speed is a pitiful 3 miles per hour, which is on the slower end of walking speed for a human. Now, why is this still an issue on such a modernised tank? Why has Russia not fixed this issue after it being prevalent for so long? Well, it's not that this can't be fixed by any means. The Polish PT91 variant of the T-72 has a much improved reverse speed of 20 miles per hour, a great deal better than the snail pace of the T-90Ms, and that is a less modernised tank than many Russian models that still retain that same slow reverse speed. This could partially be explained by a difference of doctrine as Poland became more Western aligned, as well as perhaps some oversight by the Russians, and the fact this is a very expensive change to the T-72. While the PT91 is a great upgrade, its cost is likely the largest factor as to why Russia has not engaged in the same modification, which is surprising given how important this issue is. Not only that, but these PT91s have been sent to Ukraine now, so the T-90M will have to hope that whenever it encounters this Polish variant that it gets the first shot off, or it may end poorly. So the T-90M is a T-72, but with much better armour, optics and protection systems, but with issues in regards to lethality and mobility. With all this taken into account, I do believe the T-90M would be a fantastic tank if it just had that better transmission, allowing for acceptable reverse speed. The gun depression is still a problem, but it is a conscious design decision for lower silhouette for greater concealment of the tank. Therefore, I would not say the T-90M is a bad tank. It's a modernisation of a proven reliable design that, while lacking in some areas, is not deficient enough to be unable to perform its role. The T-90M is a valid option for the Russian military given its economic issues and the failure to produce the T-14 in meaningful numbers, where the T-90 can be pumped out in moderate numbers, albeit much less than the numbers the Soviet Union used to manage. So when it comes to the T-90M, it's a decent tank when all things are considered. Far from the best, definitely not the worst. Not great, not terrible. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and if you want to go above and beyond supporting the channel, there's a Patreon link in the description below. I'm Kubota, and I'll see you next time.